I saw a strange man take my wife from me at the party. A random man, a face I had never seen before. There was no hesitation, there was no resistance from her. Just a look exchanged, a smile that lasted too many seconds and an invitation to dance that, instead of being denied, was accepted without even looking back. Something burned inside me. The bright room, the loud music, the laughter of the people around, everything faded into the background when I saw my wife running her fingers over that stranger's shoulder, laughing, leaning her face closer to his, as if I had never existed. The blood pounded in my ears. I walked through the crowd with stiff steps, ignoring the greetings of friends, the curious glances of acquaintances. I grabbed her arm, pulled her back to me and faced that man who, until seconds ago, was dancing with the woman that, until then, I called mine. Why did you agree to dance with this stranger? I want explanations now. I will divorce you immediately. Her eyes widened. There was a moment of silence, that instant when the shock seems to slow down time. The man looked at us, perhaps expecting some dramatic scene, perhaps amused by my reaction. But my wife. She didn't protest. I didn't say I was exaggerating. He didn't apologize. His silence was more devastating than any words. I didn't know it at the time, but this wasn't just any stranger. And this wasn't just a dance. It was a symptom. A reflection of what had been happening for a long time, without me realizing it. The night that was supposed to be a celebration became a battlefield. On the way home, the argument broke out. I wanted answers. I needed them. Who was that man? What did he mean to her? Since when did my wife no longer belong to me? She looked away, nervously moving her hands, as if she wanted to be anywhere else but there, in the car, under the weight of my questions. He's just a friend, she said, her voice weak, barely audible. But I knew my wife. I knew when she lied. And that hesitation, that weakness in his voice, was all I needed to understand that he wasn't just a friend. It never is. The following days were hell. The marriage that I thought was solid turned out to be a sand castle collapsing with the first wave. The answers came, not because she told me, but because I looked for them. I looked through her cell phone when she slept, I read messages that should have been hidden, I saw photos that made me want to vomit. That man was not a stranger. This was someone who had been part of her life long enough for there to be intimacy, for there to be secrets, for there to be betrayal. The ground opened beneath my feet. Everything I knew, everything I believed in, fell apart. And while my wife slept next to me, perhaps dreaming about him, I felt as if I were sleeping next to a stranger. Betrayal is not just an act. It's a break from reality. It's a fissure in time, where before and after never fit together again. I found myself walking around the house, touching the furniture, looking at pictures of us on the walls and trying to understand how long I had been living a lie. I wondered what had gone wrong, if I had been naive, if the signs had always been there and I chose to ignore them. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. I could have screamed. Could have confronted. I could have thrown everything in her face as soon as I found out. But I didn't do any of that. Not yet. Because betrayal cannot be repaired with impulsiveness. If she broke trust, I would break something bigger. If she destroyed me, I would make her feel the weight of what it's like to be destroyed. But I wouldn't do it right away. I would let her believe she still had some control. That she thought she could patch things up, that she could choose how this story would end. But no. The one who would choose would be me. I watched. I studied. I analyzed every detail. Her lover was not just any man. He was a man who already had his life, who already had his own wife, his own stability. But fate has a cruel way of turning things around. And I knew that at some point it would all come back to him. And he would come back to her too. Because whoever hurts will be hurt. Whoever plays with fire inevitably gets burned. And that's exactly what happened. Time passed. My wife began to realize something was wrong. I didn't scream anymore. I didn't ask anymore. I simply existed there, silent, cold, indifferent. And that silence, that calm, began to scare her more than any outburst of anger. Because a betrayed man who screams, who gets angry, still wants to fight. But a betrayed man who remains silent, that is the most dangerous of all. It was then that she tried to win me back. Small gestures, unexpected affection, desperate attempts to take back something that she herself broke. But it was too late. I already had everything planned. And when she finally understood that the tide had turned against her, that was when the final blow came. Her lover disappeared. He disappeared, as if he had never existed. Not by choice, but because something bigger hit him. Something he never saw coming. And my wife? Well, she paid the price for her betrayal in a way she never could have imagined. Because sometimes, the worst punishment isn't physical pain. It is not material loss. It's the void. It's seeing what you loved most fall apart before your eyes. It's looking back and realizing that the wrong choice, that single moment of weakness, cost everything. And in the end, when she tried to come back, when she finally understood that what we had was what really mattered, I had already moved on. And that, perhaps, was the worst part for her. The greatest punishment. The most unbearable weight. But this is just the beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the pain, consequences and destruction that betrayal causes are very real. Our goal is to show how a wrong choice can ruin lives and leave irreversible marks. Now, get ready for a shocking story, full of twists and relentless consequences. Listen carefully, and draw your own conclusions. The night of the party had a special shine, a carefully planned event to bring together friends, family and longtime acquaintances. The room was impeccable, the tables were elegantly arranged with pristine white tablecloths and floral arrangements that exuded a sweet aroma throughout the room. The bar full of sophisticated drinks and the strategically lit dance floor gave the place a luxurious and engaging atmosphere. Through it all, Michael and Emily were the perfect couple. They had been together for more than a decade, a relationship built on complicity, shared moments and a history that, in the eyes of others, seemed unshakable. Michael was always a man with a strong presence, firm gaze and confident posture, someone who carried with him an almost unbreakable sense of responsibility. His career as a successful businessman gave him not only financial stability, but also the security of knowing he could always offer the best to the woman he loved. Emily, on the other hand, was a woman of subtle and delicate beauty, a charming smile and eyes that seemed to carry secrets that few could decipher. She always had an air of mystery, something that made her irresistible in Michael's eyes, who never stopped being fascinated by her, even after so many years together. Their relationship had started out as one of those intense, passionate romances, the kind that makes the world seem small when you're with the right person. There were years of genuine love, unforgettable trips, sleepless nights planning the future and laughter shared in the most unusual moments. Michael always made a point of showing how much he valued Emily, from small gestures of affection to unexpected gifts that made her smile as if they were still two young people in love living a fairy tale. But time has its own rhythm, and it doesn't always work in favor of those in love. The routine settled in, the days began to be filled with commitments, responsibilities, and that subtle feeling that something had changed, even though neither of them would admit it out loud. The love was still there, but the intensity from before seemed to have been replaced by a comfortable familiarity, and with it came the small distractions, the averted glances, and the silent doubts that grew in the space between them. That night, however, none of that seemed to matter. It was a special occasion, an event that brought together important people, and Michael wanted Emily to be by his side, as she always had been. He watched her from afar as she talked to some friends, gesturing lightly and laughing at something that had just been said. Emily has always had this ability to light up any room she is in, to attract attention and arouse admiration. And Michael never bothered about it. On the contrary, he was always proud to have such a charming woman by his side. But that night, something bothered him. It was a strange feeling, a feeling he couldn't explain. Maybe it was just tiredness, or maybe it was that small distance that lately seemed to grow between the two, silent and relentless. Emily, on the other hand, looked stunning. She wore an elegant dress that highlighted her curves, a shade of red that seemed to match her aura of mystery and charm. She knew she attracted attention, but she also knew how to behave, how to balance looks without seeming like she was encouraging them. It was something natural for her, a subtle game that she always knew how to play. Still, that night was something different. There was a certain nervousness in her movements, a restlessness that even she didn't fully understand. Maybe it was the environment, maybe it was the number of people milling around her, or maybe it was just the weight of thoughts she preferred not to face at that moment. The party continued to be lively, music filled the space and glasses of wine piled up in the hands of the guests. Michael was talking to a group of businesspeople when he noticed something that made his heart slow down for a moment. Emily was on the other side of the room, next to the dance floor, and in front of her was a man he had never seen before. Tall, with a confident posture, he held a drink in his hand while he spoke to her in a relaxed manner. Michael didn't move immediately. Just watched. Emily smiled, tilting her head slightly, a gesture he knew well. It was the kind of smile she offered when she was really engaged in a conversation, when something intrigued her. Michael tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that was settling inside him, tried to tell himself that he was just an acquaintance, someone she had just met by chance. But something inside him didn't believe this version of the story. The minutes dragged on and Michael realized that the conversation between Emily and that man was not ending. On the contrary, it seemed to deepen. And then came the invitation to dance. Michael watched as the man extended his hand and Emily hesitated for a moment. An instant that, to him, seemed like an eternity. But then, to his surprise, and perhaps his shock, she accepted. She let him lead her to the dance floor, without even looking around, without looking for his eyes, without remembering that her husband was there. Michael felt his heart beat faster, not passionately, but in a different way, a way he didn't recognize. He was never a jealous man. He always trusted Emily, always believed that what they had was solid enough to withstand anything. But that scene before his eyes. That was different. He couldn't ignore what he was feeling. The music changed, an engaging rhythm took over the environment and Emily glided across the room next to that man as if she had known him for a long time. Their movements were synchronized, the proximity between them seemed too intimate for two strangers. Michael felt his body stiffen, his hands clenching into fists as his eyes remained fixed on the two. Anger rose in his throat like an overwhelming wave, but it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper. Something he didn't want to name. He waited, gave Emily time to move away, for that dance to end quickly, for her to come back to him. But that didn't happen. Seconds turned into minutes, and she was still there, dancing with that man, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. It was then that Michael decided to act. He cut his way through the room, ignoring the curiosity in the guests' eyes, and advanced towards the two. His steps were firm, his breathing quick, and when he finally reached Emily, he didn't ask for permission, he didn't try to be discreet. He just grabbed her arm and pulled her back, moving her away from that man with a firm gesture. The momentary silence that formed around them was broken only by his voice, filled with something he himself didn't know how to define. "Why did you agree to dance with this stranger? I want explanations now. I will divorce you immediately." Emily didn't respond right away. The man in front of him just smiled, as if enjoying the scene, and Michael felt his blood boil. But what hit him the most was Emily's look. It wasn't a guilty look. It wasn't a look of fear. It was a look of someone who knew something he didn't yet know. And it was there, at that exact moment, that Michael realized that this story was far from over. Michael couldn't get the scene from that night out of his head. The dancing, Emily's look, the way she accepted that man's invitation without hesitation. He mentally repeated each detail, trying to find a meaning, a justification, something that would alleviate that corrosive feeling that had settled inside him. But there wasn't. All I felt was an unbearable restlessness, a tight lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. The way back home was silent. Emily didn't try to lighten the mood, she didn't offer explanations, she just stared at the window, as if she were far away, in a place where Michael had no access. He drove with his jaw clenched, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. Anger pulsed inside him, mixed with the bitter feeling that something had slipped through his fingers without him even noticing. Once they got home, he waited for Emily to say something, anything. But she just took off her shoes in the hallway and went to her room without saying a word. Michael followed her, not having the patience to wait for her to take the initiative. I wanted to hear from her what was happening, I wanted to extract some truth, even if it hurt. The room was silent, lit only by the dim light from the lamp. Emily was sitting on the edge of the bed, massaging her wrists, avoiding looking at him. Michael crossed his arms firmly, waiting for her to speak first. But he didn't. He was forced to break the silence. His voice was deep, heavy. Are you going to tell me what's going on, or are you going to continue pretending like nothing happened? She looked up at him, emotionless, as if weighing her options before responding. Her silence was a poison that seeped into Michael's skin, burning more and more. Emily sighed, closed her eyes for a moment, and then said, her voice calmer than he expected. It was just a dance. But Michael wasn't stupid. I knew it wasn't just that. He walked over to her, bending down to the same height. You haven't looked at me all night. You smiled at him like you haven't smiled at me in months. And I'm supposed to believe it was just a dance. Emily looked away, as if she were on the verge of admitting something, but holding back at the last moment. Michael felt something inside him break, a piece of the confidence he was still trying to keep intact. He stood up, ran his hands through his hair, trying to contain the urge to explode right then and there. Who is he? The question hung in the air, dense, full of implications. Emily bit her lower lip, hesitated. Nobody. But there was a lie in that tone, a hesitation that didn't go unnoticed. Michael didn't insist anymore that night. Not because he believed her, but because he realized that the answers he was looking for wouldn't come with direct questions. He would need to find the truth himself. And that's exactly what he did. Over the next few days, he watched Emily more closely than ever. He noticed that she became increasingly distracted, that her cell phone was never far from her hands, that she smiled at the screen in a different way. He started leaving work early without telling her, just to see how she acted when she thought she was alone. He noticed that she was more careful about her appearance, using perfumes that she hadn't used in years, choosing clothes with more detail, as if she were trying to impress someone. Everything indicated that something was happening. And Michael needed proof. It was then that he decided to go further. One afternoon, when Emily was in the shower, he took her cell phone. His heart was beating fast, his hands were shaking slightly. He had never done anything like this before, never felt the need to. But now, everything seemed to justify that invasion. The cell phone had a password. He tried a few combinations, until one of them worked. And then, everything collapsed before his eyes. The messages were there. Hundreds of them. Photos, intimate exchanges, date planning. The name of the man who danced with Emily at the party was there, over and over again. Everything he didn't want to believe was registered, irrefutable, like a blade piercing his chest. The floor seemed to disappear. The messages were explicit, passionate, some dating back months. Not only was Emily cheating on him, she had been cheating on him for a long time, and with a man who now seemed comfortable enough to appear in front of him without any fear. Michael felt his stomach drop. He took a deep breath, trying to process the searing pain that was rising in his throat. There were no more doubts, no more questions. Just the brutal realization that his wife hadn't been his for a long time. He closed the cell phone with shaking hands and put it back in its place before Emily got out of the shower. He needed to think. I needed to decide what to do. But one thing was certain, nothing would be the same as before. The marriage, the trust, the security he felt with her, all of that had died there, on that illuminated screen, in that pile of messages that transformed the love he felt into something unrecognizable. Emily came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, carefree, oblivious to the hurricane that Michael was facing internally. He looked at her, studying every detail, trying to understand how she was capable, how she managed to lie for so long without showing guilt, without leaving visible clues. But now he knew. And if there was one thing he would never do, it was allow her to get away with this. Emily still had no idea what was coming. Michael walked away, grabbed his wallet and left without saying a word. He needed air, needed to get out of there before the fury took over completely. His world was falling apart, and the only thing he could do was decide how he would hold up the wreckage. But one thing was certain, she and her lover would pay for this. And what Emily didn't know, what Michael was still about to discover, was that betrayal wasn't the only secret being hidden. There was something much bigger, something that still remained in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Something that would change everything. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room, the lights off, his cell phone resting next to him like a time bomb about to explode. Each message read was a new cut, an open wound that he didn't know if it would ever heal. The weight of betrayal pressed against his chest, but there was something more, something that didn't fit. The more he reread those conversations, the more he felt that something was missing, something bigger than simply an extramarital affair. The way Emily spoke to her lover, the words chosen, the moments when they exchanged messages. It wasn't just a secret romance. There was something hidden, something that she didn't mention explicitly, but that seemed to be present between the lines. Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. He still didn't know exactly what it was, but he was sure he needed to find out. Dawn advanced, and he remained motionless, waiting for the sun to rise to make a decision. When Emily came down to the kitchen that morning, she found him sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on her, as if he were deciphering a riddle. She hesitated for a second before trying to act natural, grabbing a cup of coffee and avoiding looking at him for too long. But Michael no longer had the patience for games. He stood up slowly, walked to the counter and placed his cell phone in front of it. "Do you want to explain this to me?" Emily froze. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed the cup on the sink, her eyes fixed on the screen that showed the messages she exchanged with her lover. The silence weighed heavily between them, and Michael felt his anger grow as she hesitated. "There's no more denying it, Emily. I already know everything." His voice came out cold, firm, with no room for empty excuses. She swallowed hard, her eyes searching for some way out, some way to minimize the situation. But Michael didn't give him a chance. "How long has it been?" The question came as a blunt blow, and she finally gave up pretending. He sighed, closed his eyes for a moment and then replied, in an almost resigned tone. 6 months. He laughed, a humorless laugh, filled with incredulity and disgust. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of betrayals, of secrets shared with another man while he lived under the illusion that he still had a solid marriage. But the pain of knowing that was nothing compared to the feeling that there was something more, something Emily wasn't saying yet. "And what else are you hiding?" Her gaze wavered, looked away, and Michael knew in that instant that the worst was yet to come. The tension in the air became suffocating. Emily ran her hand over her face in exasperation, as if she were about to say something but didn't know how. Michael felt his stomach turn. "Speak up, Emily. What's the secret you're trying to keep from me?" She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with a fear he had never seen before. "It's not just a case, Michael." Her voice was shaky, as if the confession were a weight crushing her. "It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just about me and him. Michael narrowed his eyes, his mind working fast to try and anticipate what would come next. But nothing could prepare him for what Emily said then. He didn't show up at that party by chance. He knows you. He's always known you. The world seemed to spin for a second. Michael felt his heart accelerate, the pieces falling into place with a brutal snap. What the hell are you talking about, Emily? Her breathing was uneven, as if she were finally about to collapse. He knew exactly who you were from the beginning. He came into my life because he wanted to get to you. Because this was all about you, Michael. His blood ran cold. Who is he? The question came in a lower, threatening tone. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then finally said, "He's your half-brother." Michael felt a shock go through his entire body. A dead silence hung between them, but inside it, everything screamed. That's impossible. But Emily shook her head slowly, tears forming in her eyes. I swear, Michael. I didn't know either at first. But after we were involved, he told me. He said he wanted to get back at you. That he had waited years for this. The ground seemed to have been ripped out from under Michael's feet. A brother? Someone he never knew existed. And now here he was, not just stealing his wife, but playing a dirty game he didn't even know he was playing. His heart was pounding in his chest, and the world around him seemed blurry. Why did he want revenge? Emily took a deep breath, guilt written all over her face. He said that his father abandoned him. That he never recognized him and his mother. That he grew up seeing you have everything, while he and his mother barely had enough to survive. The revelation hit Michael like a punch. Your father always seemed like a man of integrity, dedicated to his family. But now, a buried secret from his past was resurfacing, taking a toll he could never have imagined. He wanted to destroy you, Michael. And I was a part of that. Her words echoed like a death sentence. Everything Michael knew, his life, his family, his marriage, everything had been manipulated, turned into a trap created years before by a man he didn't even know existed. Emily's betrayal was already devastating, but now, everything took on even greater proportions. Nothing he experienced in the last few months was real. Every kiss, every night shared with her, it was all part of a bigger plan. He was a pawn in a game of revenge, while his wife, the woman he loved, was the pawn his enemy used to hit him in the most vulnerable spot. Michael felt his chest burn. What should he do now? The pain of betrayal was already unbearable, but now it was accompanied by something even worse, the knowledge that everything was premeditated. That he never had control of his own story. That his marriage, his trust, his love were just tools for a reckoning that wasn't even his. And, worst of all, he had no idea what this man was still capable of doing. Michael felt the weight of the revelation crushing every part of his being. The silence between him and Emily seemed to fill the entire room, stifling any possibility of another word being said. He needed a few seconds to process, to understand the magnitude of what he had just heard. Your half-brother. A man he never knew existed. Someone who grew up harboring enough hatred to construct a meticulous plan, involving the only person he ever imagined could turn against him. Emily was there, standing still, her eyes filled with guilt and something that looked like fear. But Michael didn't know if the fear was for him or for what would happen next. He couldn't even look at her without feeling a growing disgust. He took a step back, as if he needed more room to breathe. You knew, Emily. You knew and you kept going. You got involved with him even after you found out who he was. His voice was hoarse, controlled, but filled with a contained fury that seemed ready to explode. Emily tried to take a step forward, but he raised his hand, as if that gesture was enough to stop her from approaching. I didn't know at first, Michael. By the time I found out, it was too late. I didn't know what to do. Her face contorted in despair, but none of that made any difference now. Michael ran his hands over his face, as if he could wash away the feeling of having been deceived, betrayed, and manipulated all at the same time. And what did he want, Emily? What was his plan? Just stealing my wife? Or was there something more? Her silence was the confirmation he needed. He laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, without any humor. Of course there was more. Emily swallowed hard, trying to find words that could justify the unjustified. He wanted to destroy you, Michael. He wanted you to lose everything. Your marriage, your company, your name. He said you needed to feel what he felt. That you should pay for what your father did. Her words hit Michael with crushing force. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a direct attack on his life, a blow designed to crumble everything he had built. And the worst of all was knowing that Emily was part of it. It didn't matter if she didn't know at first. The fact was, when he found out, he continued. He allowed that man to invade Michael's life and destroy it from the inside out. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his sanity. Where is he now? Emily hesitated, looking away, and that only increased the anger building inside him. Where is he, Emily? Her voice was firm, and she finally responded. He wanted me to stay with him. He said I should get out of this house, that you would soon have nothing left, and that when that happened, he would give me everything I needed. Michael felt his stomach turn. And you? Have you thought about it? Have you considered it? Her hesitation was cruel. I was confused. Fury exploded. Confused? You slept with the man who wanted to destroy me, and the only thing you have to say is that you were confused. He laughed again, but this time it was a laugh full of hate. Tell me, Emily. Did you ever think about me? Did you ever wonder what would happen when I found out? She started to cry, but Michael didn't feel sorry. No more. He grabbed his car keys and walked to the door. Emily ran after him, holding his arm. What are you going to do? He looked at her one last time. What I should have done from the beginning. He left without looking back. He drove aimlessly for minutes that seemed like hours. The city flashed before his eyes like a blur, and his mind buzzed with possibilities. He couldn't just accept that. I couldn't let that man continue with his plan without consequences. He picked up the phone and started looking for information, contacts that could give him something about his father's past, anything that could explain this story. He needed to understand. He needed to know what had happened for a man to hate him so much without him knowing. He was even a former family lawyer, someone who worked with his father for years. The conversation was tense, but it revealed what he feared. His father had an affair, a relationship that he never acknowledged. The result was a son who never received recognition, who grew up listening to his mother talk about how they were abandoned. The truth was there, naked and raw. But that didn't justify everything. That didn't give this man the right to destroy Michael's life. He wouldn't wait to see the next blow. He needed to act. When he returned home, he found Emily in the same place, her eyes swollen from crying. Michael. But he didn't want to hear it. Pack your things and get out of here. Now. She opened her eyes wide in surprise. What? Michael, please, can we talk about this? He shook his head. You made your choice, Emily. You chose to lie to me. You chose to go through with this. I'm not going to let you stand here and pretend there's still a marriage. It's over. She stood still, as if in shock. And where do you want me to go? He took out his cell phone, dialed a number and waited. Wherever he wants to take you. After all, wasn't that the plan? Her silence was deafening. The door slammed behind Michael as he went up to his room. He didn't want to hear any more excuses. He no longer wanted to think about what he lost. Now all that mattered was what came next. Because this story wasn't over yet. And he would make sure the man who tried to destroy him would pay for every second of it. Michael felt anger throbbing through his veins as he looked at the empty room that, until a few hours ago, still belonged to him and Emily. Now, the drawers were open, her clothes were scattered on the floor, some still on the bed, as if the room itself didn't believe that separation was real. But it was. He had no doubt about it. Her suitcase was leaning against the door, and the silence in the house seemed greater than ever. It was a heavy silence, filled with an irreversible emptiness. She had left without saying anything other than one last look that he couldn't interpret. Fear, guilt, regret. It didn't matter anymore. Michael knew that regardless of how she felt, what was done could not be undone. He sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his hands over his face, trying to collect his thoughts. The lump in his throat persisted, tightening more and more, but he refused to budge. There was no room for fragility now. Not after everything you discovered. Her mind swirled with what would come next, because this story didn't end with Emily leaving the house. It didn't end with him accepting that this was all just a tragic mistake. There was something bigger, something that demanded a reckoning. And he knew exactly where to find the answers. He got up, picked up his cell phone and dialed the number of an old contact, someone who owed him some favors. He needed information about that man, he needed to understand where this revenge went. I needed to know what the next steps were for someone who spent his life waiting for the right opportunity to destroy everything he had built. The call was brief, but enough to confirm something he already suspected: his half-brother hadn't broken up. He was already moving his pieces to attack in another way. What happened to Emily was just a warning, a first blow. The real attack was coming, and Michael couldn't stand by and wait to be taken down. He drove to a discreet bar, where he met the informant. The man handed him a folder with documents, photos, records that made it clear that his enemy had been monitoring his life for years. Michael flipped through each page with his eyes fixed, absorbing every detail, feeling the bile rise as he realized that this was more than a personal vendetta. His half-brother didn't just want to hurt him. He wanted to destroy him completely, ruin his name, his reputation, his company, his life. He had been collecting enough information to plant false accusations, to manipulate deals, to ensure that when the time was right, Michael would lose everything without having a chance to defend himself. And Emily was just a piece on the board, used to undermine her emotional stability before the final blow. Michael closed the folder tightly, feeling his chest swell with cold determination. If this man thought he could finish him off like that, then he completely underestimated who he was facing. He got up without saying anything else and left the bar, his next destination already mapped out in his mind. He wouldn't wait for the blow to come. He would take control of the situation. When he arrived at the address where he knew he would find his half-brother, he didn't knock on the door. Just walked in. The house was spacious, well decorated, a reflection of someone who knew exactly how to hide their intentions behind an impeccable appearance. His stepbrother was sitting on a leather sofa, as if he had already expected that visit. He smiled, a provocative, calculated smile, and calmly stood up. "So, you've finally decided to get to know me?" His voice was full of irony, as if everything was a game and he was having fun. Michael didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, absorbing every detail of his face, trying to see some similarity, some connection that would make this reality more palpable. But he didn't see anything. Just a man who dedicated his life to hating him without him knowing. "I know exactly what you're doing," Michael said, his voice low, controlled. "And I won't let you continue." His half-brother raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "You talk like I'm some movie villain, like I don't have legitimate reasons to want you to lose everything." He took a step forward, eyes locking with Michael's. "You had everything. I had nothing. You grew up with a father who loved you, who gave you a name, a life. While my mother and I were discarded like trash." His voice carried a deep resentment, and Michael realized that this hatred wasn't something that just started. It was something that grew with him, shaped his life. "I'm not going to destroy you because I want to. I'm going to destroy you because it's what you deserve. Michael felt the fury burning inside him, but he refused to be carried away by it. He knew that reacting impulsively was exactly what this man wanted. You think you can ruin my life and get away with it? His half-brother laughed. I've already ruined your life, Michael. You just haven't realized how much. He picked up a glass of whiskey, took a sip, and continued. You lost your wife. Your company is about to fall apart. Your partners are starting to doubt you. Your clients are going to disappear soon. Everything is happening exactly as I planned. Michael took a deep breath. But you got one thing wrong. His half-brother narrowed his eyes. You thought I'd just stand by and watch. Without warning, Michael lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and pushing him against the wall. The anger he held in for so long finally found an outlet. You may have spent years planning this, but you underestimated the one thing that could bring you down. I have nothing left to lose. He tightened his grip, eyes burning with fury. And that makes me far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. The man laughed, even with the pressure against his throat. You have nothing to lose. So why are you still holding on to your anger? Why don't you end this now? He teased, trying to force Michael to cross a line he knew he shouldn't cross. Michael felt his muscles tense, the desire to end it all right there, but he wouldn't do that. Not like that. He let go of the man's collar, taking a step back. No, that would be too easy for you. Do you want revenge? Because I'm going to give you something much worse. I'm going to show you that you failed. That everything you planned was in vain. You're not going to destroy me. You just gave me more reason to make you pay for every second of this. His half-brother adjusted his collar, still smiling, but Michael noticed something different in his eyes. A slight tension, a recognition that perhaps he had made a mistake. Michael was not an easy target. He would not be knocked down. And the war was just beginning. He turned without saying anything else and left the house, his heart pounding, his mind focused on what came next. He already knew how this story would end. And it would be his way. Michael left that house with firm steps, but inside he felt a turmoil. The adrenaline still coursed through his body like poison. His half-brother, that man he never knew existed, was playing dirty, and he knew it wouldn't end there. The cold wind bit his face as he got into the car and started the engine. He needed to breathe, think, plan his next steps. It wasn't enough to just react, he needed to be ahead, he needed to disarm every trap that was set against him. But the truth was one, this battle was not just about what he lost, but about what he could still recover. He drove aimlessly for a while, the streets passing by in a blur as his mind worked through all the possibilities. Emily wouldn't come back, that was a fait accompli. And that, surprisingly, didn't hurt as much as he imagined. What hurt was the betrayal itself, the wasted time, the fact that he was a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. But there was something worse, something he couldn't ignore, the feeling that his half-brother hadn't shown all his cards yet. The phone vibrated on the next bench. He glanced over and saw the name of one of his partners flashing on the screen. He answered without hesitation, the other man's voice filled with concern on the other end of the line. Michael, we need to talk. Now. The serious tone indicated that the storm was already beginning to break. He sighed, knowing he couldn't delay the inevitable. He changed direction and drove to the office. Upon arrival, the atmosphere was already charged. His partners were gathered in the conference room, their faces tense, papers spread across the table. He entered without saying anything, pulled out a chair and sat down. One of them slid an envelope in front of him. This arrived this morning. Michael opened it and felt his stomach sink. Forged documents, forged signatures, bank transactions that did not exist, but which indicated that he was involved in illicit schemes. It was a coup designed with surgical precision. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, massaging his temples. This is a setup. His voice was firm, without hesitation. One of the partners, an older man who had been with him since the company started, crossed his arms, analyzing him. We know that. But it doesn't matter what we know, it matters what we can prove. The silence in the room was heavy. Michael stared at the documents in front of him, knowing exactly who was behind it. He had been warned, but now he saw the extent of the plan. His half-brother wanted more than emotional revenge. He wanted Michael to be discredited, to lose everything, to be seen as a criminal. "It won't bring me down," he finally said, his voice thick with determination. "I need you to trust me. I'll work this out." Some of the partners seemed convinced, but others were hesitant. He knew his credibility was hanging by a thread. Time was an enemy now. When he left the office, his mind was sharp. He picked up his cell phone and called one of his contacts, someone who could help him track down the origin of those documents. He wouldn't wait for the next blow. If his half-brother wanted a war game, then he would play back. But his way. The following hours were intense. He met with lawyers, reviewed contracts, looked for loopholes that could prove that everything was forged. Little by little, the wires began to connect. The money that was allegedly moved never left their accounts. The documents that incriminated him had digital traces that led to another name, another origin. The setup was ingenious, but not perfect. And Michael was willing to exploit any flaw. But while he resolved his part, he knew he needed to resolve something even deeper within himself. It wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about not allowing that betrayal to continue to define his life. He wasn't the defeated man they wanted him to be. It was only when night fell that he felt tiredness set in. He parked the car in front of a small cafe, the same one he used to frequent in the early years of his marriage to Emily. He sat down, ordered a coffee and stood there, watching the city move around him. People came and went, living their lives with no idea of the hurricane raging inside. It was then that he felt someone approaching. A soft yet assured voice sounded from beside him. "Can I sit down?" He looked up and saw a woman. It wasn't someone he knew, but there was something in her gaze, something different. She seemed to analyze his expression, as if she understood the weight he carried. Michael hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." She sat down and ordered a coffee, before turning to him again. "You look like someone who's had a rough day." He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "You can't even imagine." The woman smiled slightly. "Maybe I imagine." Her gaze was curious, but not invasive. There was something reassuring about the way she spoke, the way she seemed genuinely interested, without forcing anything. Michael realized that, for the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about revenge, wasn't being consumed by anger. It was just a man, sitting with an unknown woman, talking about anything that didn't involve betrayal, lies, or destruction. The conversation flowed unexpectedly. He didn't reveal everything about his life, but he talked about things he hadn't talked about in a long time. About work, about travel, about how sometimes things get completely out of our control and all we can do is find a way to move forward. She listened attentively, without judgment. And when he realized it, he no longer felt so suffocated. At the end of the conversation, she took a napkin and wrote something on it. "I don't know what's happened in your life, but I know you sound like someone who needs a break. Here's my number. If you ever want to talk again, without judgment, without expectations, call me." She left the paper on the table, smiled and left, without waiting for a response. Michael took the napkin and stared at the number written there. For the first time in a long time, he felt something different. It wasn't anger, it wasn't anguish. It was the feeling that, perhaps, not everything was lost. That somehow he could find something new, something that wasn't marked by lies and pain. He didn't know what he would do next, but he knew one thing: he was ready to leave the past behind. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe again. Michael knew the war wasn't over yet, but this time, he was prepared. The blow to his reputation was not enough to bring him down, and he made sure to reverse the situation before everything became irreparable. Evidence of fraud was exposed, and his half-brother, who spent years engineering his destruction, began to see his own life fall apart. A mistake was made in his plan, a detail that Michael found and used against him. Tracking the fake bank transactions and forged documentation led directly to the real culprit, and now there was nowhere left to run. The man who spent his life plotting revenge was about to reap the consequences of his obsession. Michael made sure the authorities were involved before his half-brother could try any new tricks. In a matter of days, he saw the sandcastle he had built crumble. Everyone who had previously been around him began to move away, realizing that he was not a powerful man seeking justice, but rather a manipulator driven by hatred. He was formally accused of fraud, forgery of documents and attempted defamation, crimes that could ruin him completely. Michael didn't have to lift a single finger to see him exposed as the true villain of the story. The time his half-brother spent planning the chaos ended up being the same time Michael spent ensuring he was eliminated from the game for good. Emily, on the other hand, faced her own consequences. The betrayal left her without ground, without a home, without the stability she had with Michael. She tried to maintain her relationship with the man she had risked everything for, but she soon realized that he didn't see her as anything more than a tool to achieve his goals. Without revenge as his purpose, his interest in her disappeared as quickly as it began. Emily was discarded, left to fend for herself, with no one to hold her hand when she finally understood what she had lost. He tried to contact Michael a few times, but all messages went unanswered. There was no more room for her in his life. She destroyed everything, and there was nothing that could be rebuilt. Michael, in turn, found a new direction. The days that followed were of restructuring. He got the finances in order, beefed up the company's security, and ensured no major damage was done. It wasn't easy, but he knew he needed to move on. The meeting with the woman in the cafe was a turning point. He didn't look for her right away, but that moment stuck in his mind. The feeling of lightness he felt for a moment made him realize that there was still life beyond that betrayal. And after some time, he decided to send a message. What started as a simple conversation turned into something he didn't expect. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could trust someone again. Revenge wasn't what moved him there. That wasn't what kept him going. It was the certainty that he would not be defined by the betrayal he suffered, but rather by the way he chose to move forward. He saw the fall of those who tried to destroy him, but he didn't need to get dirty for that to happen. They dug their own graves. Now, as he watched life go on, he felt something he didn't imagine he would feel so soon: peace. The past was a distant place, and the future was something he was ready to build. If you made it this far, tell me what you thought of this story. How would you have handled this situation? Comment your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Here, we make it clear that betrayal will never be acceptable and that it always has consequences. Thank you for following this story. See you in the next video.